Namaste. Today I am going to talk about the bone that is the mandible. Today I am going to talk about only the parts of the mandible. Now this bone which is present here, this bone is known as the mandible. The shape of this bone is the horseshoe shape. It is a horseshoe shape. Now it's considered the two parts. This whole portion is known as a body and this portion is known as a ramus. The right and the left side of the body get fused together in this center. This portion is known as a symphysis mentae at the age of the 2 years. Now let me move on to the parts of it. This portion is known as a body and this portion is known as a ramus. Now we move on to the individual part of each parts. Now this portion is known as a body. Now this body consists of the superior surface. This portion is known as a superior surface. This portion is known as an inferior surface. And this portion which is facing to the laterally, this portion is known as the external surface. And this portion is known as the internal surface. In the superior surface, there is the socket that is present. This is known as a alveoli socket. In the inferior surface, there is present the fossa which is present here. This fossa which is present here. This fossa is known as a digastric fossa. In the external surface, this is the external surface that is present here. In this external surface, there is present this foramen which is present here. This foramen is known as a mental foramen. The structure that passes through the mental foramen is the mental nerve and the vessels. When you come to the center, there is present this area, the fusion part. This portion is known as a symphysis mentae. As I have already told you, the right and the left side of the body get fused together in the center and forms this joining part which is known as a symphysis mentae. And this symphysis mentae fuses at the age of the 2 years. When you move downwards, you have this protuberance that is present here. This protuberance is known as a mental protuberance. Now, in the inner surface of this body, there is a presence of the lining that is present here. This lining is known as a mylohyoid groove. Whereas there is one more line that is present here. This lining is known as a mylohyoid line. Now this mylohyoid line will divide the inner surface of the body of the mandible into the two fossa. The superiorly that is present here, this portion is known as a sublingual fossa. When you move downwards, this portion is known as a submandibular fossa. When you come to the inner surface here, in this portion, there is a presence of the spike-like features that is present here. This is known as a genital tubercle. According to the location, the name has been given. This portion is known as a superior genital tubercle and this portion is known as a inferior genital tubercle. Now, within this portion, you can see the line that is present here, this, which goes to the anterior border of the ramus. This line is known as an oblique line. Now, then comes this ramus, which is the quadrilateral in shape, and it is divided into the four borders. This portion is known as the superior border. This portion is known as the inferior border. This border is known as the anterior border, and this border is known as the posterior border. Now this border will continue to the body of the mandible with this line which is known as the oblique line. Now in this superior border there is present two processes that is present. Now this processor which is present, this processor is known as a coronoid process. And one more process that is present posteriorly, this process is known as a condyle process. And this condyle process will form a joint that is known as a temporomandibular joint. The short form is the TMJ. Within this condyle process, there is a present fossa. You can see the depression that is present here. This depression is known as a pterygoid fossa. Now this is the posterior borders and this is the inferior borders. This posterior borders and the inferior border will meet at this area. This is known as the angle of mandible. The angle of mandible in case of the child, it is a 140, whereas in case of the adult, it is a 110, whereas in case of the old age, it is a 140. Now then you move on to the internal features which is present in the ramus of the mandible. There is a present this opening, the hole that is present. Now in the internal features of the ramus of the mandible, there is a present this strong left projection. This is known as a lingula. When you have this foramen, the opening that is present here, this foramen is known as a mandibular foramen. The structure that passes through the mandibular foramen is the inferior alveolar nerve and the vessels. And you can see in the superior borders of the ramus, there is a present this notch. This notch is known as a mesenteric notch. And this finishes briefly about the mandible. The attachments and the origin of the muscle, we'll discuss about it in the next video. Thank you.